Testing.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. What's up?
Oh, okay, cool. How have you been, man?
Not too bad. I've already got us on a starting screen, so whenever you're ready for your camera.
Okay. Just gotta. So white. I can never get anything to show up in this background.
All right. You good?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good.
All right. And it's not capturing the right thing. There we go. Welcome everyone to Haven of Horror. I am Subject879. My camera's almost up. As always, I have Robert Wilde here with me. We're going to be a little bit focused today because we have limited time to get everything we want to get said done. Yeah. But tonight we are here to talk about all things Last of Us. We're going to talk a little bit about the show. We might talk a little bit about the game. But the main thing was that Robert wanted to kind of speculate about season 2, and I've kind of been thinking about that as I just rewatched the show. I just finished, literally like 10 minutes before we got on here, finished the last episode. It is a show I have issues with, but overall like.
Okay.
But the first thing I want to ask you, because somebody asked me this when I told them I was doing this, and we've done horror adjacent before, so it doesn't really matter to me in the end. But do you consider this horror?
Yeah, I do. There's enough in there I mean, it's very dark. It starts very depressing. I mean, it's a lot of things. Like it's not, it's a western. It's an adventure. It's coming of age story. There's humanity. Like it's not just a horror show, but there's a lot of 28 Days Later in there, The Walking Dead in there, but it takes the zombies and kind of does its own thing with them. So, yeah, I consider it horror. I mean, it is other things, and now, if you were to ask me, is it as much of a horror experience as the game is? I would say no. It's focuses more on the drama, but obviously a lot of the drama is in the
To
game
its
too. So
detriment sometimes, in my opinion. But
that's right.
um, so the game is one of my favorite games of all time. I would put probably both games in my top five. Um, Feel free to leave a hate comment below, but two is just as good as the first one. Fight me.
Yeah, I love them
Um,
both.
I just got the PS5 remaster, so I might do a stream on the channel of it once I get caught up on some other stuff. So obviously season two is coming. We've gotten some casting news, but I think I want to talk a little bit about the season one first, so we're not doing this ass backwards. And that way, if we run out of time, we can always do a second speculation video versus having to do the review after we've speculated about season two. So have you played? Which version of the game have you played? Now there's three versions.
Well, I played the original on PS3 when it came out. I played that at least twice, maybe three times. I've played the Left Behind DLC, and then I played the remastered on PS4. I've played through that a couple of times. I played through it with my niece one time. That was her first experience with the game a couple years ago. But I do not have a PS5, so I've not played the Part 1 remake yet. But the original and the remastered, I have played several times.
Okay, I
And
have
as
not
far
played, funnily enough, the original. I've only played the PS4
interesting.
and PS5 versions. And
Okay.
I have the PC version. Let me just say, I was playing that bad boy a little bit while I was watching the show, and I can set that baby on ultra and get 60 FPS. Woo! It looked
Nice.
good. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, like the PS4, it's like a bare bones remaster. It's fine. It's just the PS3 game just upscaled a little, just runs smoother, but it is for all intents and purposes the exact same game. Part 1 is like graphics, everything overhauled and redone, but retaining the same plot and voice acting. Like as far as I know, there's nothing like plot that's changed about
There's not.
Part 1,
Mostly
which
it
I think
is
is fine.
character. Yeah, no. I think the PS5 version is the definitive way to play because they didn't bring the multiplayer in. I think the biggest mistake that they made is the multiplayer. I hate the multiplayer. Um, for
Oh,
multiple
you
reasons.
I never played the original multiplayer, but I've generally heard it's fun. It feels like something I missed out on. I know some people liked it, but I never.
I'm
I
just not a
wasn't really playing
multiplayer guy.
multiplayer games. Yeah. Um,
Um,
Not to stay too long of this tangent, but of course, Naughty Dog, who developed the Last of Us games, was developing a multiplayer only Last of Us game, and they recently announced that they're scrapping that entirely. So, in hindsight, it makes me wish that they had brought the multiplayer back in Part 1, or maybe they'll put it in Part 3 if they ever make a Part 3. Well, that's a conversation for another time. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I can take or leave. But yeah, it is unfortunate they didn't bring it back for fans who enjoyed it. And like I said, I never got to try it out.
yeah, no, for sure. So let's, I guess, start. I think the pilot is a 10 out of 10 episode. I think it is an amazing pilot. Okay,
It's
actually, I'm gonna have to
fantastic.
retreat that a little bit. I'm gonna give it a 9.5 pilot. I think the beginning is a mistake. It's trying to sound smart for people who haven't played the games, but the virus isn't that complicated. You didn't need that whole opening with the guy from the Mummy.
Respectfully disagree. I love that prologue.
It's good, but it's also too handholdy, I think.
What I like about it is when you play the game, you get like these newspaper clippings and the news reports where you can kind of piece together what the fungus is. And, it's an interactive experience about what's going on. And I think they came up with the most clever way they could to get that exposition out and let people know, for who have never played the game, who don't know what this is. Maybe it is too handholdy, but I think it was the most clever way they could communicate, hey, this is
You could have done that entire thing in
It's
a
gonna be
line
going.
of dialogue after the outbreak.
I think it works better the way it is as a period
That's
piece, as
fair.
just kind of a warning, like that this could happen maybe, and then like 20 or 30 years later it does. So yeah, I like it. I have no issues with that prologue.
That's fair. I have the same thing with Ellie's birth scene, like where Ellie's being born. I didn't need that either.
I like that scene a lot because it's Ashley Johnson, and
I
that's
mean,
perfect
yeah, it's
casting.
nice to see her, but again, I don't. You don't need to explain why she's immune. That's unimportant to the story.
That's fair. It still works for me. And again, if you play the games, there's this note that Ellie's mom leaves behind her, and you can put a couple of things together as to maybe what happened. And I know that's a story that they've always had think about. So I think that's why I like it. Is do I need it? Yeah, maybe not, but it's a story they've always thought about telling, and I thought the show just gave them a good opportunity to tell that story. And it's Ashley Johnson, who's fantastic, who played Ellie in the
Yeah.
original games and plays her mom. So yeah,
No,
that's a
I'm
scene I
glad
don't have
that
an issue
all
with either.
three of the arguably main characters get cameos in this because Tommy's in it. Obviously, Troy Baker's in it. And you notice the two of them are bad guys.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then episode 2 is also really good. The clicker is perfect.
They look amazing.
One of my biggest worries going into the show was two things. One, that they wouldn't do the zombies right, especially with all the lore, like that, they have went on about the lore change, which proved to be like completely inconsequential. Like it doesn't matter. And I was worried they might change the ending because this has to be a more serialized television show. I don't know how you would change the ending in retrospect, but at the time I was like, oh, they're gonna do something to fuck this up. Like either they're gonna soften the ending, try to make it seem more black and white versus the gray morality that it is in the game, or something. And luckily they did neither of those. The clicker looks perfect. My only complaint is where are they for the next for like 7 out of 9 episodes of this show? Yeah.
Fair. I think it just comes down to budget. And look, this is a show that uses every last penny they got, and in my opinion, uses it well. So could I have used more infected scenes later on? Sure, but I was fine with most of them being cut. And episode 5, in my opinion, really delivers on the clickers and the
so
big
I guess
horde.
that's my
That's pretty awesome.
That is awesome, but thinking about it just as a whole, I would have rather preferred they use some of the budget that they used for 5 to have smaller, more intimate, infected attacks throughout the series instead of let's blow our entire budget on this one gigantic scene. But like it works well enough, I guess. And I didn't mind it as much on a second viewing, and maybe that's because I knew it was coming. But watching this week to week, I was like, where the hell are they infected? They're like important. So maybe it's just that it binges better.
I don't know. That wasn't an issue I had week to week. I have rewatched it. I guess a question I wanted to ask you up top was just now that you have rewatched the show, overall, was your experience better, worse, or about the same?
Better in the back half, about the same in the first half. Because I remember the back half feeling really rushed watching week to week, and I didn't have that as much, but I think it is still in places.
We can talk. I mean, if we want to keep speeding running through episode by episode, we can get into that when we get to the finale. But the issues some fans had with it being rushed, I didn't have even on first viewing. Could I have used 1 or 2 more infected sequences? Sure. But again, the show looks beautiful. Like last night, I wish I had rewatched the entire show because last night I was rewatching the pilot just to take a couple notes, and I was just sucked into it. I was like, oh man, this is really good. Being a year removed from it, I'm like, okay, I wasn't just caught up in the hype. Like this is really good. And one thing I did want to mention about the pilot is I agree it's one of the best episodes of the show. It's almost unfair to call it that because I don't know if you know this, but the show is 9 episodes. It was supposed to be 10. And
that makes a lot of sense.
The first episode was gonna end with the time jump 20 years later where we see the little infected child and the Boston QZ who then dies, and then we see older Joel have to burn his body. That was going to be the end of episode 1, and then everything else in that episode was episode 2. And their problem with it when they were putting it together was there's not enough of a hook here to bring people back. It's just a really depressing pilot. So is the pilot longer? Like, it's basically a movie length, which I don't mind, but if I had any criticism of the pilot, I guess it's that it's probably too long, but I don't care. And it's also feels weird to overpraise it when it's just 2 episodes smooshed together, but as is, I think it totally works. And I do think they made the right call.
I do too, because I've heard a lot of people criticize that like they don't get enough time to know Sarah and she's just a plot device. Yes, she is. For Joel's character arc, I don't need her to be a character. The amount of screen time that she gets in that first episode is perfect. It sets up her character. She is really likable, and it makes it hit harder when what happens. I don't think it feels like 2 episodes mushed together. It just feels like the beginning of the game, which is why I like it. Now, I do want to preface, because when we get to episode 3, I'm going to have a whole host of criticisms. But I do want to preface this by saying that I still think this is the best video game adaptation we've had. Not that that's a high bar, mind you, but it is there. Like, I like some of the bad ones, but this is legitimately the best one. Fallout looked promising. I don't think it'll top this.
No, I don't. And I haven't played Fallout, so I can't. I'm not qualified there.
Yeah. So we get all the pieces in motion. So the one thing I do want to ask you as well before we get to episode 3, do you think they softened Joel up too much?
I do not, because they're consistent with it. From the first episode, I think Pedro's fantastic. I'll just say the whole cast is fantastic. I don't have a criticism for any actor in the show. Some are better than others, but in terms of actors playing characters from the games, I think they're all outstanding. Pedro has a much softer side to Joel than Troy Baker does, and they're consistent with it. That is first apparent in the pilot when he's carrying Sarah and the soldier has him on gunpoint. Like, he plays that scene very differently than Troy does. Troy's very aggressive when he says, "We're not sick, help us." Pedro's much more like pleading, like, "Come on." Like, so, but when his rage comes out, I think it's effective and I think he sells it. But I like that they portray Joel as a little older, a little weaker. He's not as invincible and powerful as he has to be in the game, because you're playing as him and you have to mow down hundreds of clickers and people. So in the show, he's deaf in 1 year. He's a few years older than the game version was. And I think he's very good at playing Joel while also putting a new spin on the character. He is a lot softer and a little bit more emotional and I guess depressed than he is in the game, but I think it works because they're consistent with it. And when you get to the end and where he goes, I still think his arc totally works in the show. I don't think it's better or worse than the game version. I love both. I think it works.
That's fair. I didn't really lean one way or the other. I kind of went back and forth. I think we'll save episode 3 to the end, just because that's going to be mostly me complaining, and I don't want to.
Let's get into episode 3 now, because I adore that episode. So let's rip the Band-Aid off on that.
Okay.
I love episode 3.
You have 9 episodes. Why the fuck would you waste over an hour on a filler episode?
I don't think it's filler. I think it tells a very good, compelling side story that mirrors.
That's what filler is.
That relationship. But I don't see filler as a bad thing, if you want to call it filler.
It's not if you have more episodes. I think, and I think part of where we differ is, even though I liked it more on a second viewing in a binge, I still think that 4 through 9 are a little rushed in places. And I think that's because they dedicated so much time to this other thing. This is about Joel and Ellie. I don't care about anyone else. I don't need an hour-long episode that's just there to check mark boxes. Oh, we have these characters. And, at least me personally, and I'm not going to lie, I could not separate my love from the game for this, from the show. This is not Bill. This is not the Bill that I wanted.
That's fair.
That's not the Frank that is in the game either. It's too sappy for this material.
Hmm. I think it works. I think it's very moving and emotional. And I think Bill mirrors Game Bill enough where they just go on different paths, but you still get the traps, you still get him as like this survivalist. I think Nick Offerman's great. And they they end in very different places, but still it's in the game. Bill's a reflection of what Joel could be, you know, the loner who's just
Yeah.
surviving with nothing else to live for. And in the show, it they take it in a different direction. But I think the message about love and finding people to fight for, which is going to be very important to the end, I think whatever, if you find some things in the back half rushed, I think that letter Bill leaves for Joel in the show about finding something to love and fight for and hold on to, I think that does a lot for Joel in the show.
See, and I
So
don't like that. Joe should get to that conclusion on his own without any extraordinary circumstances. I cannot see a world where any other show could have a 9 episode count and dedicate an entire episode to everyone but the main protagonist of the show and get away with it. That is
it
so
doesn't.
much screen time and development you sacrifice for Joel and Ellie for these random one-offs. And I have to admit, it put a bad taste in my mouth when I heard the rumors of a spin-off, because now I'm like, oh, okay, so you wasted this episode, this hour-long episode, mind you, for a backdoor pilot.
Craig Mazin already confirmed they're not doing that.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. Okay.
That was very
But
recent,
still.
but he did confirm they have no plans for more Bill and Frank. I love the story. I think it works. There's enough Joel and Ellie in it for me that I think it's fine. It's not like they're completely absent. A big defense I have, or my counter to you about spending time with other characters, is that's a big criticism a lot of people have with the second game. And I think looking, if this was just a mini series, I might be more on your side. But knowing what's coming with season 2 and other characters we're gonna be following and spending time with, I think this helps kind of massage in just the structure and feeling that we are gonna follow some other characters' stories for a little bit. That's gonna come
the
a lot
only
in future
the only
seasons.
problem that I have with that argument is, I don't want to say a bad faith argument, but it's not comparing the situations. These are two side characters that are appearing in a one-off episode. The Last of Us Part 2 is a dual protagonist story, and we switch protagonists. They're not the same.
Yeah, that's fair. But in season 1, also, we do spend more time with other characters. They don't get their own whole episode dedicated to them, but you know, we see a lot more David and his group and the different groups that they encounter throughout. So
to compare this to a superhero movie, because we're both superhero fans, watching this episode feels like watching that 10 minutes in Apocalypse where it just becomes a Wolverine movie for no reason.
I don't have that at all. I see where you're coming from. I just don't agree.
And I see what you're saying with it being kind of the same character, maybe in a way, but I think softening him down to where he's someone that Frank can put up with is a fundamental change to that character. That robs it, and it robs us of all character interaction with Bill, Joel, and Ellie. Like,
in the context of the show, I didn't need it.
Like, I was talking about more zombies. Instead of that bloater set piece in 5, how cool would it have been if they did the gym scene?
I mean, that would have been fun. I didn't miss it. I thought what I got in episode 5 was enough for me.
That's true.
And like I said, at the end of the day, the story worked for me. I love the performances.
But anyway, I'm just being stubborn at this point.
I'm happy. It's fine. Here's what I'll say. It's by far where we diverge the most from the game. And when the show was coming out, there was something I was hearing from critics that, the show is at its best when it does its own thing. I don't completely agree, because when it sticks to the game, I think it does it really well for the most part.
It's most engaging when it sticks to the game. The last thing I do want to say about this, and I preface this by saying I'm happy for anyone who enjoyed it, but to me it came off they wrote what they knew people would like, because if you hate it you will get lambasted on the internet, and it's in some ways emotionally manipulative with how it handles the end. And like I said, it is way too sappy for the Last of Us world. The Last of Us Part 1's theme is of love, but even with that love, the main source of that is Joel and Ellie, and that is a fucked up relationship.
Yes.
This is not the kind of world where you have something like Bill and Frank. In fact, I would argue that the game is much closer to the theme of love thematically, with Bill was so intolerable that Frank couldn't handle it, and he left and then got himself killed. That is much more fitting of this kind of story than that episode is.
In the structure of the show, I think it works having a bittersweet episode like that, or something with more of a happy ending. You know, when it's in between Tess's death and what happens with Henry and Sam, which they stick very close to. So,
and they handle that excellently.
Yes, and I will say I think your criticisms are fair, and if you've played the game and you don't like that they went that direction, that's fine. I haven't heard anyone who didn't play the game that watched the show criticize that. Like, everyone I know who didn't play the game but watched the show really liked episode 3.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah, and I think it's fine that they went a different path, but
I'm
for
just
the rest of it, I'm glad they spent more. No, you're fine. Like, look, the game is my favorite video game of all time. I love the game. Do I love the show as much as the game? No, but I didn't need to. At best, it exceeded my expectations, and at worst, it met my expectations. I have nitpicks, but for me, they're just nitpicks. I really love this show. I don't love it as much as the game, but I didn't need to. Like, I always love the game, and I think the show's great.
I would say I would give the game a 10 out of 10. I would give the show maybe an 8 out of 10.
I think that's totally reasonable.
Well, okay, we go on we do the letterbox rating, so this would be like a 3.5 out of 10 or 5, and the game would be a 5 out of 5. So the last thing I really want to bring up, because this is one thing where they changed just a little bit, and I think it improves on the game, is the Henry stuff. By adding that woman villain.
Yeah, I think she works. A lot of people didn't dig her performance, and she totally worked for me.
I think the performance is good. The problem is she's very one-dimensional. Like, to the point where she even says, I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I like that, because one of the things that's kind of funny with the game, because it is a video game, these guys have to constantly chase you throughout the city when you're with Henry for no reason. And they find a reason to they find a reason in the show and introduce this woman character who's after Henry for something, and kind of gives them a motivation, even if it is kind of flimsy. And I think that works quite well.
And it parallels a lot of where the show's gonna go.
Yeah.
Just with the themes of revenge.
Yeah, and hate.
And I dug the choice of casting a deaf actor as Sam. I think that kid was great, and I think they used that well, because the hurdle you have to get over is like, okay, how are they going to communicate? And his little pad he has that he writes stuff on, like his scene with Bella, I think is beautiful. Like, and that's a scene that's different from the game, but I think totally works. I think they nail that ending.
And you notice they sprinkle a lot of hints at part 2 throughout the whole show.
Yes, it definitely informs it retroactively.
Which, like, part of me likes. Part of me is also like, you just don't want the shit storm that you had a couple of years ago again.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, it's whatever. That's my least complaint with this show. Yeah, no, I mean, everything else is pretty solid. David is great. I liked the religious angle with him that they added.
Oh, for sure. Before we get to that episode, we should say I really like the Left Behind episode. And that one, granted, that one has Ellie, so that one probably works better for you as a side story with
Riley, is what episode 3 wants to be.
I think that's fair. I think they both work, but I really dig, and that sticks very close to the game. If you've played the Left Behind DLC, like that's like very shot for shot, line for line, but I think it's executed very well.
I think it's perfect. They have Ellie and Riley.
Sure. Yeah.
The actresses' names are escaping me at the moment, but they have excellent chemistry. And it's wonderfully tragic. I think it works. I think its placement is great in the structure of the show. Oh, okay. So since you brought up, so this is the last thing I'm going to bring up, and then we kind of got to move on. If there's stuff we need to talk about at a later time, we can. Did you think that the whole Joel getting stabbed was too easy? Or did they have to kind of tone it down because in the game it's insane? Because like in the game, you remember he has that giant ass pipe like sticking through his spleen.
Well, in the game, when I played it, I was like, oh, he's dead. Like, no one plays that game and thinks he's going to survive that. And I think the show could have had a little bit more action and built up that group more instead of just being one encounter. But I did think it was more realistic. Like, nah, he's just stabbed with like a broken off bat and he's done. Like it's consistent. With, you know, he's not as powerful as the game version is. He's a little bit older, and they address that. And everything after that with him dying, but Ellie nursing him back to health, like that is all very well executed in the show.
Final question before we move on to speculation. Do you think he's partially deaf because of the hearing mechanic in the game?
I don't know, but I would love it if that was it.
Because I don't know if that's cringy or not, if that's what it is.
If it is, like, it's so subtle, it totally works.
That's fair. That's just the first thing my mind came to. Okay, so Last of Us Season 2, we know it's coming. We've gotten some casting news. Caitlin Denver? Is that her name? Deaver?
I don't know how to pronounce it. Caitlin
has apparently officially been cast as Ellie. It's so hard to tell rumors from what's officially been announced. I like that actress quite a bit. She was on that Last Man Standing sitcom with Tim Allen. And she was in a Hulu horror movie, No One Will Save You, or something like that. Really interesting movie. No dialogue.
That is what I've heard.
She should just get off social media now. Like, please.
I hope she has.
So, I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it. Please feel free to leave hate in the comments. I think Ellie's great, or I think Abby's great. Do I prefer Ellie? Of course. I have more of an attachment to her as a character. But I hate to say it, Abby is no different than Joel.
Nope.
That's the whole point of the game, and you people missed it.
Yep. And, oh God, where to start? Because I have a lot of thoughts.
So, this is not, I don't think season 2 will be part 2. I think, or at least not the current day's part 2 stuff. I think season 2 will be the flashbacks. And we will parallel Ellie and Abby's journeys. And maybe if they decide not to drag it out, because I've heard they want to take this to like 5 seasons and do just like a consistent 5-season run.
I haven't heard that. I have only, now of course that depends on if we get a third game or not. That has not been officially announced, but I have only heard them talk of the second game as being 2 seasons. Okay. That I have heard repeatedly.
So maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
They don't have plans for more. But.
So I think the most obvious way to do this is you do the flashback stuff, you do the degradation of Joel and Ellie's relationship, and the season 2 finale cliffhanger is Joel's death.
Yes. We are on the same page. I'm not one to like write fan fiction. I don't do that. But in my brain, I have like all 9 episodes mapped out, and I'm really curious to see if the show even remotely resembles. Because the way I picture the pilot is you do a prologue similar to the season 1 prologues, where I see the pilot or the premiere of season 2 opening, introducing us to Abby. Not the whole sequence, but just enough with her and her dad for the audience to go, oh crap, oh no. And then for the rest of the episode, we catch up with Joel and Ellie and all that stuff with him getting the guitar. And
which introduction to Abby though? Do you do the forest stuff?
I don't know if you need to do the whole scene with like the zebra. You could replace that with something.
Because what I would do is I would just pick up right where the finale left off in that hospital room, and she runs into the room. That's all you need.
That's not a bad idea. I would start like with a scene with her and her father, and then I would end the first episode getting back to that and showing her reaction. Like that to me, that's how I would.
That might play better just in my head.
Putting a bow on that.
Yeah, that might be more closer to what they do. Just in my head, that's how I see it's the finale picking up where the premiere picking up where the finale left off, and you see the doctor dead on the room, and then Abby comes in and sees him. And that first episode is about her like succumbing to that need for vengeance and then departing.
And the stuff in the game, like, oh my god, like for me the game is worth it, like just for that opening with Joel and Tommy telling him about what happened, getting the guitar, teaching Ellie.
Oh, it's so good.
The scenes are so good, man. And there's a lot you can expand on that's inferred or mentioned in the game that we can actually see, like telling Tommy's wife about Ellie's situation and the bite and how do we hide that? Well, let's do a chemical burn so that other people. There's all these things that are alluded to in the second game that like you can just with context clues, but in the show you have the freedom to show that stuff. Like let's
and
see
it will give
and
it will give that actress time to the girl that plays Ellie time to, I don't want to say bulk up, but like get into like shape, because Ellie is a very lean character, and that's part of her character. She's quiet, stealthy. I don't buy the Ellie in part 1 in the first season as the Ellie in part 2, but I think she can get there.
I think Bella can get there, and same with Abby, because some people aren't happy with Caitlin's casting just because she's not going to be.
I'm going to be honest. I don't need her to be a Hulk.
It's fine. They're clearly leaning into just them being two sides of the same coin, especially since Caitlin was at the top of my fan casting list for Ellie.
She was for everyone.
Yeah, so I still want Caitlin to bulk up. Like, I want a transformation, but I obviously don't need her to be as big as Abby is in the game. And remember, this season's going to take like 6 months to film, so both of them can bulk up like over the course of the season. Like, I think they could look very different from the premiere to the finale. Like, the show takes a long time to film.
Yeah, and I think they will. And I don't need Abby to be as muscular as in the game, but I do think that there is a purposeful choice in making her muscular, because she's obviously very muscular, very bulky, and Abby is slim and quiet and moves like a cat.
You and Ellie.
Yeah, Ellie. Sorry. So I think you can get both actresses there, or at least as close to there as they can. Don't risk their health to make a show.
Yeah, don't go absurd with it.
But I think this season will be the parallels, because they want to beat it into people's head. Neither one of them are bad. They're just coming at the same situation from different points of view.
Exactly. And now we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but one change that I like in the show that worked for me just for the period piece aspect of it is so the game comes out in 2013. And in the game, the apocalypse starts in 2013, then we jump 20 years later. In the show, they have the outbreak start in 2003, so a decade earlier. And then we jump up to 2023, so now, but the world's all screwed up. One potential consequence of that is, if you care about this sort of thing, is one of my favorite scenes in the second game is when Joel sings Future Days by Pearl Jam, which is a song that did not exist in 2003. Do you care?
Oh.
Or do you think they should pay?
Is that the big song, If I Were Ever to Lose You?
Yep.
Ooh, I don't know if I like that. I think that's a very specific song choice that is very important.
I think a way around it is two things. One, I think you could get away with having that, like the Pearl Jam version of the song play like during the end credits of an episode. Because it's not in the world, it's outside the world. So if it's in the end credits of an episode, I think that's fine. I also think there are other songs you could substitute it with.
I'm also going to be honest. I'm fine with them just saying it came out earlier than it did.
I am fine with that too. I wouldn't care, because that's wonderful. But my pick, if you have to replace the song, is Your Song by Elton John. If you don't know it, look it up. I think Pedro could sing that song beautifully, and I think that would be a really good substitute for future days. And there are other Pearl Jam songs that some fans have uh, suggested. I'm not very familiar with Pearl Jam, but if they want to just do a different Pearl Jam song, that's fine. I would have to hear it and see it play, but I'm with you. I'm fine if they say, screw it. But I think there are other songs you could substitute it with.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to hear it in context, but just thinking about it with no particular replacement in mind, I think that is a very important song for both Joel and Ellie's character arcs across both parts that you kind of need. Or if you have to replace it, fine, just make sure it's as thematically relevant.
Yeah. And there's other moments in the second game where, now granted, this is optional, like you can miss this, but when Ellie and Dina are together and Ellie plays Take On Me, it drives you crazy when players miss it, because I'm like, no, it's such a beautiful moment. But they
It's
reference
so good.
like, it's so good. And they reference that there was like this moment by a bonfire in Jackson where she sang that song, and I want to see that in the show. That'd be great. Like, if you're doing the flashbacks and doing a whole season, that's a scene we can see. Like, and we already had Take On Me in season 1. It's already been established that Ellie knows and likes that song, so I would love to see that moment. But I don't know if you know this, Bella's a terrific singer, so I can't freaking wait to get
I was
to
actually
the Bella
about to ask
songs.
you if Pedro and Bella can sing. That's good though. Because one thing I love about part 2, part 2 has, I think, the greatest reveal trailer of all time, where Ashley Johnson is singing the through the shadow
through the valley.
Yeah, that's it. I want a full version of that song so badly. It's so good.
Okay, I'm gonna skip to the end, but then we'll get back because I have other thoughts. Would you be okay, assuming that Joel dies in the season 2 finale, if our final scene at the end of season 2 is that scene, but it's with Dina, and it's Ellie singing that song and says, "I'm gonna find and I'm gonna kill every last one of them," and that's how he closes out season 2? Do you like that, or is that too cutesy?
I would love that.
I think it works.
I think it works. But maybe I'm just a sap, but I think that works. If you don't want to do just the straight, like, if you want to leave it on a more like cliffhangery note versus just like there's Pedro's dead body, yeah, that I think that's the only other way to end it.
Because you could also montage with it where while Ellie's singing, like we're seeing her and Dina on the horse leaving Jackson, and then we just end it with the moment of Ellie saying, "I'm gonna kill every last one of them," and that's how it comes. Let's see. Because the problem with season 2 is if they do follow the structure of the game, and I don't think they will, but if they do follow the game structure where Joel dies early on, and then we have that break where he switched to Abby, if season 2 ends with Abby holding Ellie at gunpoint, and then season 3 is the Abby story, I think that's the worst case scenario. I think that is the really bad idea.
The worst case scenario, and I've said for a while, as much as I love that game, the way that it is structured is a mistake.
I don't think it's a mistake, but I'm excited to see the show do it in a different way.
Yeah.
And if in the game, if you hate that moment and you're like, oh, now I gotta play as Abby and do all this, imagine having to wait a year after that to see Abby start. Like, oh my god.
No, I think their best thing is to do the flashbacks, slowly, gradually introduce Abby, immediately establish her motivations, and parallel the two. My only worry with that path is this show has shown that it does not have the budget to do action. Season 3 would have to be 90% action.
Yeah, that show was such a hit, though. I think we will get a bigger budget
because you got to do the scars. You have to do the Washington. What is their name?
The Washington Liberation Front.
Yeah, the Liberation Front. That whole war. You're gonna have that whole like scene with Abby on the island.
Mm-hmm. And season 2, I think, can introduce, because a potential problem with season 2 is Ellie and Joel are just going to be stuck in Jackson all the time. So you need to make sure that the Abby stuff is also interesting. Like, we can be introduced to the scars and all that. I don't agree. I'm saying that as like a potential criticism. I don't actually feel that.
But even with the structure of the game, you have when they go out looking for the guitar strings, you have the museum.
Yeah, well, dude, the museum, that is my favorite sequence in the game.
It's like, so good.
I
love it hurts so bad.
It does. And when people complain about the game, like, oh, I wanted more Joel and Ellie, I'm like, I got enough. I got a lot. Because when Joel died early on, I was like, oh, I really hope there's flashbacks.
Well, because you know what's funny is if they had just made what people wanted, which was the first game again, they would have still complained.
Exactly. And if you finish the game, you do get a lot of Joel.
Yeah.
And
when I do my Last of Us Part 2 stream, I want you to be there with me so we can talk about the game while we play it.
Oh, for sure. And also, one thing we should mention is just the fact that Pedro is very popular right now and going to be very busy. So I think it's really smart to film all of his stuff for season 2, and then have season 3 just be the Ellie Abby stuff, so that season 2 can give Pedro that out. I think that makes sense.
And some people who are only familiar with the show are in for a rude awakening.
Oh yeah, and the episode 2 I picture, so episode 1, picks up after season 1 and establishes Abby and Joel and Ellie at Jackson. I picture episode 2 covering a lot of Ellie's birthday and the museum stuff. Episode 2 is the only episode of the season that I would end on a happy note, where it's them like with their relationship like at their closest as father and daughter. I don't think you need the Firefly tease that ends that, because that's very important to the structure of the game.
I'm gonna disagree, because before you do that, you have to do the episode where he teaches her to swim.
Yes. Well, I think you could do that in the same episode.
That's true.
But that's totally fair. We do need that. Like, how much more time do we have? When do you need to get out of here?
We have 9 minutes, so we'll wrap things up. We'll start to wrap up. I think, personally, just in my mind, the museum should be the halfway point. That is, you have the first half is them having a happy relationship, him being the dad that she never had, and her being the daughter he lost. And as you go along, let's say it's 9 episodes again. Maybe episode 4, like halfway through episode 4, is when she starts to get suspicious and goes back to the hospital. And the end of episode 4 is her finding out what really happened, and then Joel shows up, and it's a shift in dynamic for the rest of the season.
I definitely see that happening in episode 4 or 5. I don't want that to be the same episode with the museum and her birthday.
No,
I want that to be prior.
Okay, no. Okay, so how about this? We do the museum episode 3. We do the museum in episode 3, and then episode 4 at the end is when she finds out what really happened.
Well, and another idea I had, just how to expand it, is remember when they're looking for the guitar strings in the game, which is between the museum birthday section and her going back to Salt Lake City and finding out what happened.
Because all the flashbacks are in order, right?
Yes. Okay. Remember how they find those 2 dead kids from Jackson, and they like read that note where it's like, and that's what like starts like the first like argument they have about it.
Yeah.
Those can be characters in the show who we spend a couple episodes with, and they're like, I think we should go out and invoke people. And then like episode 4 or 5 could be, the driving plot could be, instead of looking for the guitar strings, like, oh, there's these 2 kids from Jackson missing, let's go look for them. And then they find their dead bodies, and then the argument happens. That's just an idea I had of just how to expand that. I don't want to lose like the stuff with the guitar strings. I'm just thinking like, how do we, because the flashbacks in their entirety, if you just did the flashbacks, would be like a few episodes. Like, it's not that much material. So that was just one idea I had on how to kind of expand that little.
Well, keep in mind, but if we assume this gets as many episodes as this season, that's 9 episodes, and for whatever reason they decided to give them all different lengths, I think you could make a 9-episode season out of the flashbacks in this.
And I do. And okay, and this is a big one. I think the penultimate episode, I mean, I said an earlier episode should be the only one that ends on a happy note with the birthday and the museum. I think the penultimate episode, the second to last one, should end with Joel and Ellie reconciling. Like that beautiful scene in the second, at the very end of the second game. I think that should be how like the second to last episode ends. Or do you think they should save that moment for the end of season 3? And if you do, I have a rebuttal.
But neither.
Give me your thought.
That
Okay.
should be the opening of the finale.
I could live with that. I would prefer
Because that scene is, if you put it together, is the night before he dies.
Yes.
So I don't think it's a bad thing to have it be the end of the penultimate episode, but personally, I think it would hit harder if it's the same episode that he dies.
That's fair, but also like if their only screen time together in the finale is the death scene, like like that's gonna hurt. Like I think they both hurt for different reasons. But it's just because the second game, when we do the time jump, we start with Ellie waking up and then she goes out with Jesse and she goes like that's how I would start the finale.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
So, and the reason why I asked was because that ending at the end of the second game is so freaking powerful. But if they structure the show the way we do and they save that moment for the end of season 3, you have the problem of general audiences getting that scene of Joel and Ellie. They'll be thinking, okay, when was this? Is this the last time?
You can't end it with that.
Because
season 3 will have a depressing ending, but it should end with her walking back to Jackson.
Mm-hmm. I agree, but I think a really good substitute for that moment would be a scene that we've already seen, and that's exclusive to the show that isn't in the game. It's their conversation at the end of season 1 when Joel talks about being the other guy and him shooting himself, and like the moment where she says, "Oh, I guess time heals all wounds," and he says, "It wasn't time that didn't." I think that's a little 2-minute scene you could pluck and put at the very end of season 3 that we've already seen, but I think would still hit pretty hard after everything Ellie's been through in season 3. That's my idea.
What I would do is I would keep the scene of her walking away from the farm to Jackson, but have that audio be playing in the background.
That works too. Because that's, in my opinion, that's a great scene in season 1 that's not in the game.
It is, yeah. Well, and that goes with this Joel is much more emotional and soft than the game Joel. So any final thoughts before we wrap up for tonight?
I'm excited. I can't wait to see if I got any of this right or if they do something completely different. But we're clearly on the same page that to split that game into 2 seasons, they should do it more chronologically and not try to copy the structure of the game.
I just don't think the structure of the game would translate.
It wouldn't, and I like the structure of the game. It's ambitious. What I love about the flashbacks in the game is with every flashback, like you're given a different feeling of what Ellie's doing and where her headspace is. Like, and it's a criticism. It's a thing some people don't like that I think is totally fair, where they're like, I'm not in her shoes. I don't know all the information she knows, and that's not fair. I think it's a fair criticism, but it made a really unique experience for me where with each flashback, it just changed the way I was perceiving the game. And that was really cool. But I don't need the show to replicate that. And the show, I just think, has the opportunity to tell the same story, but in a different way, like getting to know Abby and get invested with her for a while before she kills Joel. I don't think that's better or worse than what the game did. It's just an opportunity to do it differently, and I think could really work.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to have to cut off here. We will do another speculation video, I think, when we have more information. Sure, and then maybe in either Sunday, if not this Sunday, then maybe in like a week or so, I might try to do a Last of Us Part 2 video game stream. And if you want to be on there just to do like dialogue, talk back and forth more about this, I'd love to talk more Last of Us.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for tuning in.